Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome on behalf of the RES4Africa Foundation to our webinar. I am Mr. Roberto Vigotti, the Secretary General of the Foundation. I want to remind you that in our first webinar 3 weeks ago, we highlighted that placing renewable energy at the heart of COVID-19 recovery measure is crucial to bridge the energy access gap and build a resilient and sustainable economy. 1 week ago, we had another webinar calling Connecting the Dots, and we noted that only 2% in the last decade of renewable addition worldwide happening in Africa. And we cannot settle with that has been achieved. We need universal access to electricity, and this will not be ensured if we won't be able to accelerate the renewable energy transition in Africa, for Africa, with Africa. Today, in our third and last webinar before the summer break, we present our third flagship publication, Scaling Up Africa Renewable Power, which is dedicated to de-risking renewable investment in Africa. By the way, all the 3 deliverables which we are keen to give to you can be downloaded from our website. Every webinar has a deliverable. As for my webinar, my pleasure is to introduce now Joy Dorembira, a well-known media personality who is now more and more becoming the voice of our foundation. Joy, thank you for accepting to guide us through this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roberto Vigotti. And greetings, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're joining us from around the world. It's good to have you joining this third webinar that is focused on scaling up renewable energy investments across Africa, and of course, de-risking renewable energy investments on the continent. And just like Mr. Roberto did mention, the first webinar was on the impact of COVID-19 on Africa's energy sector and how we can look into a sustainable recovery as well. And then the second one was on why exactly we had 2% renewable energy addition on the continent, and also what are some of the best practices and where could we have gone wrong. And now I think it's important for us to look at the need for de-risking investments and the case for RenewAfrica today. Of course, Africa needs electricity for its socio-economic growth. All sectors are backed up by energy. Talk about infrastructure, talk about the ICT sector, talk about health, and all these other sectors cannot do without energy. And this is not new knowledge to anybody, at least not the ones who have been following the renewable energy conversations. And so the landscape of the currently running de-risking programs is overcrowded and deemed inadequate to fulfill market requirements and achieve scale, which is why we need a new support program, and which is why we've got a very important guest to speak to us today. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome our very first speaker, who is the CEO for NL Group and Chairman for NL Foundation. And he's none other than Francesco Starace, who is going to talk to us about the road ahead. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Starace.
Thank you very much, Joy. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you and with everybody else in the webinar. Thank you again, Roberto, for organizing this. I think it's another show of resilience under the present circumstances. So congratulations once again. Let me just say a few words on old things and new things that have to do with Africa, to put them in the right context from our standpoint. We all know that Africa is the largest land mass on Earth. It's the maps don't show the right proportions of Africa vis-a-vis the other continents because of the projection that we are used to see of a spherical surface of Earth. But if you look at Africa on a circular, not on the map, but on the sphere, you understand the dimension of the issues we're facing. Physically, it's the largest continent by far. It's the largest land mass, and there is a lot of empty space in this large mass. Why I'm saying this? It's because there is a perception that the problems of Africa can be solved using methodology used elsewhere, which is not going to happen as we have all witnessed. Africa is also an extremely rich in natural resources and an incredibly varied renewable energy potential machine. There is a lot of everything. There is a lot of hydro resources. There is geothermal variety. There is wind. There is a large abundant solar resource in many spaces of Africa. So you would argue that there could be a prerequisite and a great opportunity for renewable energies to be already widely used in the continent, but it is not the case. And that's because we have a lot of risk perception in the eyes of investors, and a huge fragmentation in terms of nationalities over this large continent. So it's not only the largest continent, but it's also the most fragmented from a country standpoint. So an investor that needs to go to Africa needs to understand a lot of different cultures, a lot of different regulations, a lot of different law systems, and has to deal with this fragmentation across countries. That is a bit discouraging, to be frank. Then there are other considerations that have to do with the present time, because what I said is something that has been valid for centuries. Now, what happened in the last decades and probably in the last 10 years is that renewable energy has become competitive, practical, easy to assemble and to install, and extremely easy to run, robust, and absolutely suitable for any part of the world, Africa included. It was not the case 10 years ago. Now it is the case. And another observation is that as we're speaking, the population of Africa is moving to cities. There is an urban innovation trend all over the world. This is not only an African theme, but it is also happening in a big way in Africa. So why are people moving to cities everywhere in the world? Because they think that in cities they will find more opportunities to develop their family and their future. They think that in cities they will be perhaps more protected by violence and aggression that happens in many parts of the world. And they basically have hope that in cities their future will improve. So we can agree or not with these things, but this is what happens everywhere. The trend is so strong that, you know, the projection that by 2030 we will have more than 60% of the world population in this large megalopolis, whether we like it or not. I mean, we can then say it's terrible, but it's still going to happen. Cannot prevent this. So why this is, from our standpoint, important? It's because big cities need to be powered. You cannot have large urban population without electricity, living peacefully and living a healthy life. You need to bring power and you need to bring electricity together with a lot of other things like running water, sewerage, and so forth. But without electricity, all these other things simply cannot happen. So one, there is an incredible potential of competitive, easy, renewable energy being produced in large parts of the continent. Two, there is growing need to electrify large metropolitan areas where African population is moving. Then let's not forget there are also areas that are not covered by big cities where population still needs electricity. But these two new things give us hope. Why? Because governments need to address the city problem. No government can survive in a state where its large metropolitan areas suffer. And if large metropolitan areas do well, countries do well, increasingly so. So they need to electrify cities, and they need to do that in a sustainable way. Needs to be at the core of the attention of any government that has the welfare of its population in his mind. And this is about the effort of Renewable Africa initiative, because we think that we need to make sure that the ruling classes of the African continent focus on these few things: what needs to be there in terms of legal framework and regulatory frameworks to address the perception of risk that, right or wrong, sometimes investors still have in some parts of Africa. The experience of programs like scaling solar has proven to be positive. I mean, with a few intelligent measures and some attention to legal and regulatory framework, this risk perception has been addressed and mitigated to the point that investors like us and others have been investing in countries where we had no particular appetite. We saw the potential, but we were a little bit skeptical about the possibility to really convince our boards and our investors that it would be a good idea. It is proven to be the case. So we think to scale up this, this initiative across different parts of Africa is really the key to unleash and unlock potential investment in electrifying with renewables this large continent. I think the continent has an incredible opportunity to skip completely, I would say, century of thermal generation that we have to deal with in Europe and other parts of the world. You know, we're dealing with decarbonizing Europe. We shouldn't be dealing with decarbonizing Africa 50 years from now. We should just power it carbon-free, which today is possible. And I think IRENA has made a great, I see here Francesco La Camera, so greetings to him. I see IRENA has made great studies in proving that the renewable potential of Africa is enough to power the continent and to power it in a sustainable way. So this is good news. There are not only problems in Africa, there are great opportunities. And the solution here is to be honest and tell the truth to governments and explain to them that it's not anything, it's not going to the moon, it's not crazy, it's not difficult, it's just requires some dedicated attention to basic issues. There is, of course, the need of funding, there is, of course, the need of investment. The COVID-19 crisis make funding available in a very large way, so I think it's in the disgrace and the tragedy, there is also an opportunity that we could potentially vehicle some part of this funding to investment in infrastructure that will make the large metropolitan areas of Africa more livable and decent, and also power the rest of the continent with renewable energy. So I really look forward to this webinar. I think there is an incredible open potential here. There's always been one, to be honest, and this is a little bit the issue with Africa. It's always been a promising something, but here I think it's not anymore a promise, it's a potential reality in front of us from an economical infrastructure standpoint, provided the legal framework works. So let's just focus on these few things. There are so many countries in the continent, I don't think they will all switch together, but if, say, a group of 10 does it, then the others will understand it's easy and they will also do it. And then the whole continent can become an incredible example to the world. Thank you very much for the time, and Joy, back to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Starace. That was quite insightful. Scaling solar is positive on the continent, but we could do better. And we have seen success stories. If you attended the second webinar, we did look into examples of Morocco and South Africa as well that have success stories on renewable energy. So thank you so much. I would now like to invite Francesco La Camera, who is the Director General for IRENA, and he's going to be talking to us about the post-COVID recovery and agenda for resilience, development, and equality. And welcome, sir.
Aspetta, Francesco, I'll mute.
Thanks, Joy. Thanks, Roberto. And, happy to be with you today. Thanks for the invitation, and also share with you my perspective. You know, we are now in the middle of unprecedented time, where we see a lot of disruption, and as Francesco say, at the end we can see also some opportunities, because from the disruption we have been that we have assisted and we are assisting, there is possibly the hope for a better future for everyone. And what is important to notice in this frame is that renewables have been proven to be the most resilient way to power our cities, our home in this time. We have seen the decreasing the share of the fossil fuel component in provide electricity, and we have seen the share of renewables growing up, and was very difficult to foresee. But you have assisted also in the first quarter of the year that we have had a record of foreign investment in renewables around the world. So this gives hope that these could be an opportunity to accelerate the energy transition. The energy transition, as has been said by Starace just before me, is something that is already happening. In the last decade, we have seen that the installed capacity of renewable has been systematically outpaced the conventional one. If someone can help me, because I'm not succeeding in moving the slide forward. Okay, so as you can see from this graph, in this last decade, the installed capacity that is in orange here in this graph is outpacing the traditional one systematically. And the zero between the two paths, the one over the renewables and the one in no renewables field, is widening year after year. And in the last year, in 2019, the 72% of installed capacity came from renewable. More than 1/3 of the global installed capacity today is coming from renewable. And this is happening not by chance. It is happening because renewable are becoming year after year more and more competitive. So we can go to the next slide to show this. And all the renewables are all in the fossil fuel cost range now, as you can see from the graph. And what is more important to notice that regarding onshore wind and solar PV, from the next year there will be the most competitive way to produce energy in a large part of our planet. In our cost report that has been published, I think the 2nd of June this year, we have assessed as the next year 1,200 gigawatts of coal power plant will be operating at a major cost that if that power was provided by investing in new renewable plants. So we are, I think, in a very turning point, and the tremendous amount of money that will be put on the market in this period and the next month will be crucial to accelerate this path. We can move to the next slide, please. And this is the work that we have published. I think it was the 24th of June, and this is our agenda for resilience, development, equality. Why we decided to come up with a report like this? Just 2 months ago, the publication of the Global Renewable Outlook. The reason is very simple. The Global Renewable Outlook is saying, I hope very clearly, where we have to go to be in line with the Paris Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals up to 2050. So it gives the medium and long-term perspective, where we have to go and how to get there. I felt the needs to link the short term to this medium or long-term perspective. This was the reason for working on the post-COVID recovery. And for me, it was very important because strategy as for Africa, it's very evident that we have to avoid to go for the thermal generation, where we in Europe, in other parts of the world, are coming to, to recover the damage of that choice. And how is important that in these periods, we are not going to bail out energy sectors that have been stranded out by the markets, not by the COVID, but by the market. So we cannot use the COVID to go back in the past, because if we go in that direction, we are just building the stranded asset of the future. And what is more dangerous is that we have this healthy crisis that become, because of lockdown, an economic crisis. But if you do wrong choices in recovering, and we are going to reduce stranded assets, this means that we'll bring this crisis also to the financial system, that for the time being is still in good health. So it's very strategical in my point of view that we make clear that the short-term response has to be linked to the medium and long-term perspective. We go to the next slide, please. And this is what we need in our agenda. We say that we need at average $2 trillion US per year in this triennium to link the short term to the medium long-term perspective. And this could be also very beneficial in terms of jobs, in terms of GDP. So what we say that we have to double, in fact, the investment of if we look at the 2019 level in these 3 years, and we have to run, because what is important is an accelerating to be in line with the Paris Agreement. This investment and these policies to favor this investment has to be put in place. So we go to the next slide, please. And we can see the beneficial already in these 3 years. We can get 5.5 million jobs instead, and that this include also a shift from the traditional fossil fuel plants. So the net impact will be around 4,500,000 more million jobs. This will be a net advantage, and we will have a 1% adding GDP. That is important because our estimation that are different of others, because we have a basis for making our adding estimates, is giving this 1% that is a good contribution on GDP. And we have, this is just a passage, because we have to run in this decade where we need, as will be shown in the next slides, we need an average of $4.5 trillion. But for getting that number, we have to work on different, sphere of activities. So the ambition, and as you know, IRENA is supporting 110 countries in reviewing the NDC, so that the NDC could be really owned by countries, not like in the way to Paris, where they were just a work of consultants. We need to make the right use of the public intervention and give it the sense of the future that we want to build. So the investor have to see that there is clarity, that the governments are going really in the direction that is needed. Because if the government putting in place investment for better grid, interconnected, smart grid, if they go invest in the network for rechanging cars and other, the private money will be there. There is no doubt. As has been said by Francesco, where the legal environment, where the policies of the government are very clearly showing the way the private money will arrive. So the investment, we need to scale up, as we say, and this will bring benefits in terms of employment. But this means that there be also policies in that area, because we need to reskill people to go from the old sector to the new one. We have to have also industrial policies, so that the regional, domestically, we can have all we need for promoting, for enhancing our capacity for investing in renewables, and then continue to work on access. And still in Africa, there is this movement to the cities where there are still people that could be more effective join with electricity through off-grid, mini-grid plants. Go to next slides. I'm trying to go faster. And these are the investments needed in dedicate, and that will be a large part in renewables, but in electrification infrastructure will be very important to have this number. And a large role will be played also by the energy efficiency. So as I told you, we need around 4.5 trillion per year in investment of energy transition. We can move next, please. And these are the contribution in terms of jobs. We will have in dedicate 16 trillions of contribution to the GDP, and 1.3% of ID GDP on average in this year. And this is already absorbed the more GDP that we will have with the recovery. So this will be already comparing a no lockdown GDP with a usual GDP. So this is a real number that we can show. Going to the next slide, that I'm going to be a little bit late. And the last slide are dedicated to the climate investment platform that we have launched to facilitate the investment in Africa. I think the response that we have received has been really impressive. We didn't expect having so many partners, and they are joining day after day. And we have important multilateral bank as the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the North American Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, and others. And we have also the worker. We have company as Enel Green Power. We have a development agency. Naturally, this work is organized for our investment forum that will take place when the lockdown will easy. But in the same time, we are starting to facilitate the matching, where a country or investor ask ARENA to facilitate to getting the risk insurance, to get the modification, the amendment and the legal environment needed to make more investments. So we are trying already to do some job before the investment forum, because unfortunately the pandemic has delayed the organization of the first one. The last slide is that we have also opened to our 14 cluster, where can be presented idea that we as ARENA we facilitate to be conceptualized in concept notes that may be understandable, readable, to be presented to the investor. Naturally, we continue to assist the company that ask us to be assisted, and naturally the government. And for Africa, we have already 51 projects, and the import is not very big, it's 1 billion, but it's growing because new projects are coming. And we have already 132 partners that are presenting this idea. So I think this could be beneficial for Africa. This work. We have also, in my last comment, we have to defeat this narrative that because Africa has a lot of coal, a lot of oil, a lot of gas, they have to go for thermal. This is not possible. This is anti-economical, is anti-environment. We have to join force on this respect. We have some misleading messages that we see are coming from many entities in this time. But I'm sure that the work of ARENA will be day by day make clear that the only choice we have, or the better choice we have, is going for renewables. Thank you for your patience. I've been a little bit long. Sorry for that. Sorry.
Apology accepted, and thank you very much. The insights were very deep, knowing that, of course, the International Renewable Energy Agency supports countries in their transition to sustainable or to a sustainable energy future. And so in case you are listening in and possibly do not know much about ARENA, that is exactly what they do. And they're supporting about 110 countries around the world. So thank you so much, Mr. Lacamera, who is the Director General for ARENA. I'd now like to invite Vera Songwe, who is the Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary for UNECA, who is now going to talk to us about the role of the private sector for Africa's sustainable development. And just to mention a bit, UNECA was established by the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations in 1958 to promote the economic and social development for Africa. Very warm welcome, Vera.
Thank you very much, Joy. Nice to see you. Of course, so Roberto, thanks for having us. Francesco, Antonio, everybody else, good to have you here. I'm supposed to talk about the role of the private sector in Africa, and let me remind Africa. We are now facing, before I start, maybe let's just put ourselves in the context of where we are. We are facing a COVID crisis, and which is a health and an economic crisis as we have never seen before in 100 years. That essentially is going to take us back from a growth perspective. On the continent, we were expected to grow by about 3.2%. We will now go back to maybe 0% if we are lucky. And if we are not, and if this crisis persists, and many people are talking about it being a Nike-shaped crisis, which means that it sort of stays down for a long time and then takes a time to come out. So as opposed to what normally we talk about, which is a V-shaped crisis, you go in and you go out very quickly. If we don't find vaccines and if we don't understand how we will travel and how investments will happen, it may take a lot longer for us to get out of the crisis. So that's a little bit the context in which we're having this conversation. The second thing is that unlike many countries in the West, Africa has not suffered the kind of magnitude of the health crisis that we were expecting to happen. I think we all watched in awe, horror, and fright as we saw countries like Italy and Spain, sort of battle through this crisis. And I think we were just wondering and very scared of what will happen if we had to sort of be confronted with that kind of a crisis on the continent, given the lack of sort of health facilities that we have, or the acute lack of health facilities that we have compared to the other countries. We have been so far spared, and I say so far because our numbers continue to rise, but not at that speed. We have about 11,700 deaths so far. But that's the context on the health side. On the economic side, however, we have seen a massive, massive hit in our economies. As I said, we're going from 3.2% to 0% growth. That is because essentially everything else came to a massive halt. When the rest of the world closes down, your economies close down too. And many of our African economies are economies that are linked to their small open economies. So essentially it is trade, it is jobs that power this economy, it's jobs that are pulled by the external demand sector. So we are now today confronted with the situation of asking the question, how do we build back better? How do we get back from this crisis that has just hit us? And what do we need to do differently? Africa's service sector contributes about 53% to Africa's growth. So essentially, as we talk about, what are we going to do and how do we do it, we're looking also at the service sector, tourism, ICT. We're being able to meet today in these difficult circumstances, but still meet and see all of you because our ICT systems continue to work, and so we can continue to have this conversation. So trade today has moved to an ICT platform, education is moved to an ICT platform, health has moved to an ICT platform. The whole world is moving into that. Interestingly enough, ICT consumes about 40% of energy. So for us to be able to have on the continent a viable ICT sector that will allow our economies to build back better, we're going to need a lot of energy. So that's the first part and that's why this conversation, I think, and thank you, Roberta, for all the work that you've been doing on this, is particularly important. Africa's power challenges are threefold. First of all, it's just the infrastructure. The infrastructure is so underdeveloped, it's difficult to see how we raise the bar and ensure that we can do better. The second one is the supply, which is access to electricity is low. We've talked about, and Francesco has talked about the cities. I talk about the continent. We don't have access to supply of electricity either in the cities or in the rural areas. Of course, the rural areas tend to suffer even more from lack of access to energy. And this is, I think, where the private sector comes in, is the cost of energy. And we do need to talk about that. I think that Francesco talks about the risk perception. The risk perception then tends to reflect itself a lot in the cost. And so even as we try to say that we're providing energy to the continent, we provide it at such prohibitive cost that today, as we talk about financing, and there's a lot of discussion out there about Africa's debt, a lot of the conversation around Africa's debt is also about how Africa's infrastructure is financed, and that we need to, I think, begin to honestly and seriously look at the financing structures of Africa's infrastructure. If we finance infrastructure at shorter time frames that it takes to build that infrastructure, then of course, we run into these questions of debt sustainability, which have come to the fore of the conversations around COVID, and for which institutions like ECA spend a lot of our time trying to deal with that. And so I think as we come out of this crisis for the private sector, one of the easy and early things that we need to start talking about is how we structure financing around some of our infrastructure, and in particular our energy, so that it is consistent with the scale, the time required for that, for the energy investments to take place. And I think that this is not just an African problem or a question of African perception or a question of African policymakers. It must and has to be part of the financing side of this conversation. So as we talk about what we require on the continent, it becomes important that we on the continent talk about what we require from our financiers, so that those two things can come together in a way that is seamless. And the second thing is what constrains our investments. Part of this, and it's sort of a chicken and egg issue. Our utilities are not doing well. We all know that. On the continent today, we don't have many utilities that are doing very well. And by doing well, I mean utilities that are actually making a net benefit, essentially because most of the utilities are over subsidized. Their performances are low, collection is not good enough, transmission of the network is old and poor, and so a lot of the electricity that is transmitted is lost. Actually, today on the continent, we only have 2 countries that have viable electricity sectors, Seychelles and Uganda. Only 19 countries on the continent are operating at expenditure. Several countries are operating at excessive losses on the continent. So I mean, there's 2 where over 50 countries, if only 2 of us are viable, the rest of us are not, which therefore means that when private investors come, they are looking at this sort of, I'm investing into a system that is potentially about to go bankrupt. So again, because you think you're investing into a system that is potentially about to go bankrupt, you make it even more expensive. And so part of that problem is the cost reflective tariffs. We must ensure that on the continent, tariffs are cost reflective. And this is, I think, essentially one of the things that Francesco was talking about. We must ensure that the price and the cost of electricity adjust itself automatically in a way that you don't require. And we have seen this happen. I think that in countries like Senegal, in countries like Uganda, in countries like Kenya, these experiments have happened and they've been very successful. So I think that we know how to do it and we can ensure that it's done. But many of the countries are still struggling with, I think, what is a legacy problem. It may not be centuries old, but it clearly is decades old. Of, we are still having, we have two Africas in some sense. We don't really have the transition problem in the kind of scale in which Europe has it, as I think Francesco said, and Mr. Sarache said as well. because we have a lot of these countries running on heavy fuel oil, which will never be profitable, which is draining their economies. And I'm surprised we're not talking about that. And so I don't think that the conversation for the continent is a conversation around transitions. It's a conversation around actually just sort of substituting really, really expensive, bad fossil fuel. And let's be honest about it, into something that is cleaner and probably cheaper, or most certainly cheaper. And that's where, Francesco La Camera, I have a little bit of a bone to pick with you there on gas, because I think that we do need to have an honest conversation on gas. And I just worry a little bit that if we decide that we're going to go from heavy fuel oil to solid power, Germany has asked for 18 years to transition from coal. I think that there has to be an honest conversation on the continent about what does Africa's transition look like. Africa cannot go from heavy fuel oil that is draining. I mean, all the efforts that countries like Senegal, Mauritania, Mali are putting in place. I mean, if Senegal today cannot transition from 7, 8 heavy fuel oil engines into some gas while it waits for some renewables, even though it is actually one of the countries that is doing a lot of renewables, has a good environment, has done a lot of IPPs, if we use IPPs as a benchmark for better performance, we see that that is happening. But I think that there is going to be a need. Africa cannot be the one that always bears the brunt of the fast transition, and you can't do, we don't have the time to sort of ensure that the transition is done in a systematic way. The second thing I'd like to talk about as we talk about this conversation on transitions is power pools. As Francesco Starace said, Africa has many countries, so we have over 50. So it is impossible for all of us to produce energy. And so one of the things I think that is going to be a game changer for the private sector is the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which within it, of course, has the sale of energy. And already we have installed on the continent a number of power pools, but so far we have not been successfully able to make those power pools viable for different reasons. One of them being essentially the sort of trade agreements across countries. But with the CFTA, I think we can do more, we can do better. We have a couple of power pools that are already beginning to show some promise. The West Africa Power Pool, the Southern Africa Power Pool. Actually, for half of this year, South Africa has relied on power from Zimbabwe and its neighboring countries because it could not produce its own energy. So there is a system I think that we need to look at. The investments on that power pool for the private sector, $9 billion investment in interconnections, which could yield about $3.4 billion reduction in annual power costs. So I think that as we talk about the conversation on energy investments on the continent, looking at sort of how we collectively come together to see how these power pools work is going to be particularly important. And finally, I have 2 more minutes. The last thing that I want to talk about is what is exactly is the state looking for from the private sector. I think there are 3 things. I've talked about the cost of the investment. The second thing is we must finally begin to look at whether we can actually find local currency investment for something as basic as energy. We must, as financial sector players, see whether local currency borrowing for some of these investments is important. And why do I say that? It's because in many countries, energy is consumed by the locals who are going to pay in local currency. Every time, just with the COVID crisis, we got a 20% movement in exchange rates. Immediately, as we have all been saying, many countries then get into trouble because they cannot pay their take-or-pay arrangement. So I think that we do need to look at this financing component of the conversation. It is equally important, if not even more important, than the risk perception conversation that we're having. So we must shift to what is the, and Francesco La Camera, I'm very happy to work with you on this.
Okay, I think we lost her sound. Thank you very much, Vera Songbe. Okay, I think your sound is back. Or were you through? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vera Songbe. Those were quite some deep insights there you shared. You talked about the structure financing, and maybe at a much later stage, we'll be able to ask how best you think this can be done. I'd now like to invite Antonio Camisekra, who is the president for RES4Africa Foundation and the CEO for NL Green Power and president RenewAfrica Steering Committee. He's going to talk to us about introducing the RenewAfrica initiative on the continent. A warm welcome to you, Mr. Camisekra.
Well, thank you, Joy, and thank you, dear participants. It is a particular pleasure for me to tell you a little story about how we came up with the idea of the RenewAfrica initiative. And the launch of this initiative represents probably the essence of the activity of the foundation of RES4Africa, which is the foundation that is hosting this webinar dedicated to the RenewAfrica initiative, and the reason why we decided joining forces with many other players in the industry, but also multilateral banks and institutions to dialogue together in order first to analyze the value of such a potential program, and then work for more than 1 year to define what is the skeleton for a possible program for Africa. So first of all, I would like to say the following. Many things has been said by Francesco Starace, by Francisco La Camera, by Vera Songwe. I tend to agree with almost everything with what you said, with a little exception on the role of gas, but this would deserve probably an entire dedicated webinar, which we'll be happy to organize maybe. But the fundamentals has been highlighted by the three speakers, and I don't want to go through them again. So, but also Mr. Vigotti presenting in a very, let's say, effective way, the outcomes of the two previous webinars about, first of all, the potentiality and possibilities of a green recovery, especially in a moment of pandemic economical crisis, which is the one that we are living at planetary level, and some facts about the fact that some visual representation of the very marginal contribution of Africa to the big development of renewables. Actually, I would say the other way around. The marginal contribution to Africa of the bigger renewable investments that happen all around the world. We said only 2% happened in Africa. But these two things further stress and probably finally validate that the idea that we got 2 years ago and started working on 1 year ago of launching a European program to foster the development of electricity access through renewables in Africa was absolutely brilliant. I like to say that it's brilliant, it's because it's my idea. I'm joking, of course, but I think we were in the right direction. So it was not difficult to gather such a number of members in this initiative. We are now more than 35 between entities, organizations, and private companies working together to try to promote this initiative. The industrial, social, and economical reasons why we want to do that are quite evident. We started from a field experience. We started from the frustration of having the willingness to do, but not finding the minimum set of conditions to be able to deliver. I've been involved in Africa project developments for more than 15 years, and I have to say that most of the conventional knowledge about the hurdles to really promote physical projects in Africa are completely wrong. So when you involve yourself in project development, in real project, in infrastructural project development in Africa, you understand that project lay very far away from what normally is thought problem to be. So we said, let's join the real field experience of many players. Let's join the willingness of many banks and multilateral institutions to try to overcome those barriers. And let's try to design from bottom up a program that will be tackling those elements or those hurdles, those, let's say, barriers that make difficult, as Francesco Starace said, to go in a boardroom and convince a company to allocate capitals for a project in Africa with such long-term payback period, like power project typically are, like any infrastructure project typically is. This difficulty that Francesco was referring to was the one that I lead, for example, when we decided to enter in Zambia, or when we decided to enter in South Africa. And the reason why we were able to do it was exactly because those two countries that I mentioned, South Africa first and then Zambia, have got different but similarly valid holistic programs that can accompany, let's say, easy the long process for an investor to define a project, develop it, try to finance it, and then physically start building and then operating for many years. So when we saw the effectiveness of those programs, but also the absolute marginality of the contribution that those programs were having in the big scheme of things for access to electricity and economical development in Africa, we said probably those programs are the starting point, but unfortunately, if left alone, they are not enough to make any difference from the situation where Africa is living, energetically speaking, and what they should be, not only for the to give a hope of a sustainable economical, social, and cultural development to new generation of Africans, but also to make mindful all the big efforts that Europe is doing in the quest to limit the CO2 emissions, because I want to remind to everybody that CO2 is a global problem. So there is no point in reducing CO2 emissions in Europe, try to convince the United States to do the same, maybe South America, and then having all the rest of the world keeping emitting, maybe emitting more, because of course the Africans have the right to have power, and they probably want to have power no matter what. So that's a problem that Europe has, like being emitting in Germany or in Poland. So 1 kilogram or 1 ton of CO2 emitted in Nigeria is exactly the same, has the same effect as a CO2 ton emitted in the UK. So we asked ourselves, first of all, there are synergies and common interest between the European industry and the African industry about this, and we bear the responsibility as European operators, because we represent the most important part of the industry. I mean, the renewable is largely a European industry. Besides any conventional wisdom that everything is going to China, that's not true at all. Research and innovation is happening in Europe. The wind industry is largely European. Many part of the solar industry is still in Europe, and maybe that with some vision, that is some product that's been lacking in the past somewhat, but with some new vision, also part of the solar manufacturing in the module part can come back to Europe. So why this is important? Because Africa, because we're tackling this we're tackling this on a pure economical basis. So we believe that Africa can become an important market, a very important market for renewables. So we would solve two problems at once. From one side, we would probably try to leapfrog directly to renewables without passing to long, difficult, not efficient, and polluting other form of generation. But at the same time, we are enlarging the renewable market, representing a very important stimulus, especially in a moment like this where the COVID has brought us back somewhat 10 years, or I mean, maybe 5 years at least. So there is a combination of economical interest, of sustainability interest, and of development interest in having Europe to cooperate with Africa about a program to stimulate and, let's say, speed up by a factor of 10 or 100, hopefully, the speed of penetration of renewables. So, so you know the idea. Vera participated in the launch session. Some of you probably participated in the launch session in Rome. When we gathered in Rome at the beginning of June or July 1 year ago, more than 1 year ago, we were full of hopes and with one idea and many hopes. Today we have the same big idea. We don't have hopes because we don't need hope anymore, because we have facts. So we have been working for a lot of time with many brilliant people contributing from many companies, many banks, many multilaterals, many organizations, and also becoming closer and closer to the EU Commission, because we started a process of socializations of our idea. We checked that if we were in the right direction, with multiple formal moment or informal moment also, if you like, in which we explained our idea, we defined the direction, and we understood that yes, we were in the right direction, that what we were trying to propose was exactly in tune with the idea of the support to the development of Africa that Europe was building, the new Europe, the new Commission was building. We also get acquainted more with the African Union to check if what we were trying to propose was mindful for Africa, of course, which is the market in which ultimately we would like to work. And the preliminary feedbacks were very positive. So we have been working practically and physically, dividing in 6 chapters that I think you will go through later in the webinar. And now we have a skeleton. So we have defined the program. The program has a skeleton, and I think it's not only a skeleton; it's a skeleton with some fat and some muscles on it. So it is now clear what we have in mind. We have worked, with many people contributing from many area of expertise. So we are about to finally formally propose this idea, this initiative to the European Commission. Our dream is that RenewAfrica could become, in the field of renewable electricity, the main pillar through which Europe will contribute to the development of renewable energy projects in Africa. This is particularly in tune with the green recovery, that, as you know, is probably the most important. It's, let's say, the next gen program. European program has a very important part dedicated to the green recovery, to the green development in Europe. But as we said, there is no green development in Europe if we don't have a green development in Africa and in the rest of the world. Of course, Europe wants to start to do, its first steps, which is the best way to create let's say, an example to follow. But then we strongly believe that Europe should also cooperate with Africa to help Africa to create the condition for European capitals, European expertise, European knowledge to further and probably involve those assets, capitals, technologies, expertises, also in more African markets that are not the only few that are already, let's say, somewhat open, like Morocco, South Africa, and a few others that we mentioned before. We have formally requested to, let's say, discuss RenewAfrica at the highest possible level with the EU. We are awaiting an answer. I'm sure that we'll get the attention of the Commission at the beginning of mid of September, probably after the summer break, or whenever the Commission will deem this more appropriate. So, but now what I want to share with you is that we are ending the creative phase. The skeleton is there, the program is there, so the proposal is there, and now it's about to discuss with EU and to understand if it fits or not with the EU general view on renewable development in Africa. Then, of course, we needed to do a second. If this step will be completed successfully, then we have to complete another very important step, that is to strengthen the dialogue with the African Union and with the African individual governments to also understand if this package can be deployed in as Francesco said, ideally we need 10 countries. With 10 countries joining this will become very visible and will represent a very turning point, in our opinion, in the development of renewable, in the development of electricity, more than in renewable. Renewable is an attribute in the development of the power sector in Africa. They will represent a first and after. So we are not full of hopes anymore. We are full of things to do, which is I'm very satisfied, because from an idea to be now in the position where we are, with a well-defined program that we are able to propose now and to discuss at the highest possible level, means that we have been working well in the last year or so. And that's thanks to all the people and all the members that joined the initiative and allocated the resources and also, if you know, passion to this idea. So I hope that now we will present. We have dedicated the flagship publication of RES4Africa. You know, RES4Africa since a number of years have a monography that we dedicate to a specific topic, like access to electricity, like many things. This year, the flagship, as the next speaker will explain very well, is dedicated to RenewAfrica. So that's the RenewAfrica year for RES4Africa. And I hope that by the end of this year, we can celebrate the official launch of the initiative in the hands of the European Commission. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Antonio Camisecra. We do appreciate those remarks. And, you know, just like he mentioned, RenewAfrica initiative. What is RenewAfrica without the voice of young people? And we'd like to share with you a short video of a young Kenyan lady who is the co-founder of Women in Energy Africa. She's called Lilian Motongori Jamunga, who is telling us about how Africans imagine Africa's energy sector in the future. Have a look at this.
The Africa I want is an Africa where there is gender equality in the energy industry. An Africa where women are involved in the decision making, in the technical, policy, economies, finance, and also in the non-technical industry. The Africa I want is an Africa where clean energy is a normal day-to-day solution to our energy problems. An Africa where renewable energy is the solutions to carbon emissions within this country. The Africa I want is an Africa where women matter in terms of energy decisions.
Joy, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, that is Lilian Jamunga, who is a 25-year-old Kenyan, talking about the Africa that she envisions, the Africa she imagines, one that has equality in the energy sector. Now, I would like to invite Gus Shellikane, who is the independent Senior Sustainability Advisor, RES4Africa Foundation. He's going to speak to us about RES4Africa's flagship publication, which is talking about scaling up Africa's renewable power. If you recall, there was a publication that was put out in 2018, and then another that was put out last year, and this is the third publication. And of course, it talks about how best Africa can scale up its renewable energy investments. And welcome, Gus.
Thank you very much, Joy. I have some slides as well. If you could ask the organizer to bring those up, please. While we're waiting for those, just to say my name is Gus Shellikane. What I'd like to do today is to take you through a short introduction to RES4Africa's 2020 flagship publication, which can be found on the RenewAfrica website. I will skim through it fairly quickly. I would highly recommend that you look through the publication yourself and that you also share it widely with colleagues. And thank you for joining us today. So if we move to the first page of the slide, you can see that the flagship publication is a yearly institutional report. Its purpose is really to support high-level dialogue, awareness raising, and communications. This third edition of the flagship report is dedicated to the theme of de-risking renewable energy investments in Africa. And I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank the contribution of the many participants in the report, as shown on the right-hand side. The narrative for the publication begins in Africa. We know that Africa is a land with great opportunity. And we've also identified that electricity can act as a fuel for its socio-economic growth and ambitions. And renewable energy is perfectly placed to provide that electricity in a sustainable way. But we also know that the historical pace of renewable energy investments has been too slow, and that we haven't seen the progress that we've hoped for. We've reached out to the private sector to take action, but many of them remain cautious. Parts of Africa remain very high risk for them. So the focus on de-risking mechanisms is particularly appropriate because if we can remove some of those risks, the opportunity remains appealing, and then hopefully we can increase the level and scale of involvement by many of the private sector actors. What's also important to note, and this is mentioned at the bottom, is that it's very much a partnership effort. It needs to be led from and by Africa with the help of European and international expertise. And it also needs to focus beyond de-risking at the end of the day, because for any project, there remain a number of challenges that need to be overcome before it can be successfully delivered. If we take a step back, let's start at the beginning and let's think about the socio-economic opportunity for Africa. Africa as a continent is being affected by a number of structural transformation trends as set out below. There's emerging economies, there's new industrial revolutions, there's urban transitions happening at scale, demographic transformations, of course, and the impact of climate change. These create both risks and opportunities, but a common thread that runs through all of these is that access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable electricity is fundamental to Africa's hoped-for growth journey. Electricity links to everything in society, and a number of studies have shown that. The ability of sustainable electricity to have an impact requires a deep transformation of Africa's power sectors as they exist today. And generation capacity also needs to grow substantially for it to support this. This sits within a wider context, as many of you will be familiar, to enable a bigger role for renewable energy and a greater impact of sustainable electricity requires significant policy changes to define and implement energy access strategies. The good news is that renewable energy technologies already represent the most competitive, secure, and sustainable solution to achieve universal electricity access in most African countries. If we can make the hoped for progress in the coming years, renewables could account for over 60% of total electricity generation in Sub-Saharan Africa by 2040. But I think we also need to recognize that this is a complex area. On one hand, as I said, we need the transformation of the power sector, and we need a large increase in generation capacity. But on the other hand, we also need a greater role by the private sector, and bringing with them substantial and sustained investment to make this change. As we can see on this slide, the role of the private sector or private sector participation is higher in the generation side, and this is largely as a result of many of the renewable energy programs that have run the last few years and the success of those procurement programs, but it remains low from a transition and distribution point of view. There are ways to change this, and certainly from a contractual point of view, international power purchase agreements represent the best available option to scale up private sector participation in power sector development across Africa. So we know how to do it and how we can be successful, but we need to see more momentum and more activity happening. In this report, we've particularly focused on, as I said, the role of de-risking for renewable energy projects. Risk perceptions today are still too high. In some cases, they may be unfair. In some cases, they are compounded by access to reliable information. So people make assumptions or group countries together and ignore project-specific or country-specific risk factors and progress that governments have made. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do, as shown on the curve on the right, is move the project on the bottom right up to the top left. So we're reducing the risk of the investment, and we're increasing the financial return for the developer, the operator, and the government at the end of the day. The IPP model that I mentioned on the earlier slide is one example that could be used to work. But of course, we should also be open to new models that we can perhaps develop within Africa, for Africa, as well as continuing to bring expertise and best practice from other countries around the world. If we look at de-risking in a little bit more detail, earlier studies have shown that today's de-risking instruments fall short of what is needed. They are often well-intentioned and in some cases well-designed, but there is a lack of awareness in many cases, and it tends to be a fragmented and often incomplete landscape, with perhaps too much focus on the early stages of projects and less focus on some of the more vulnerable, more critical later stages of project development. And as part of the work that we've done and RES4Africa has done, there's been a realization that de-risking initiatives should also sit within the political and the policy landscape, supporting energy reforms and real estate expansion, improving the adequacy and predictability of those, the building of capacity so that more can be done and driven locally, as well as looking at social environmental risks so that we're not building things but also causing harm by building more things, expanding the private and public sector cooperation, and making sure we look at it from an overall project lifecycle approach. The next slide is a little bit small to read, and I apologize for that, and I'd encourage you to have a look at the report itself. But what it tries to show is the structure and the approach of the new RenewAfrica initiative. It starts in the top left by highlighting the fact that we have many different stakeholders that need to be involved and remain supportive of the discussion and the progress on renewable energy going forward. These come together, and where RenewAfrica plays a role is by focusing on 4 main focus areas, as I've set out before: strengthening the political will, creating a conducive market and business environment, offering a fit-for-purpose set of financial de-risking instruments, and finally enhancing the technical capacities of the local workforce. So there's actions and tools, and Antonio earlier highlighted some of the work that's already been done by the team, which is quite significant, and I'm very excited to see that being rolled out in the next few months. Applying all of this knowledge, tools, expertise into the different project phases that you can see on the right-hand side, from project preparation through to construction and O&M, and then also a focus on project outcomes. Sometimes we fall into the trap of just thinking about the project and delivering the project without thinking about the broader outcomes and the longer-term outcomes from those projects. So we need to make sure we're not just providing electricity, but we're also benefiting Africa in more than just that area. This slide provides a little bit more detail on how the RenewAfrica initiative will look to engage. I've already mentioned about the desire to really build partnerships, convening all the relative parties into a single ongoing dialogue, so that we have the views represented, but also we can share best practice and hopefully make the fastest possible progress. Delivering training to build capacity, it makes sense to build the workforce within Africa, for Africa, so that can be driven forward locally, and also we have the opportunity for more local innovation. Providing assistance in technical preparation and project execution, so using some of the expertise from Europe and making sure that as programs are taken forward, as procurements are run, they are run as efficiently and effectively as possible, and they attract the widest possible interest from international players. And then finally, coming back to de-risking, helping to secure tailored financial packages. If we can minimize the risks and improve the attractiveness of projects in Africa, there is money out there that's looking for projects and returns, and it will come to Africa. The next slide provides a little bit more detail just in terms of how Renew Africa is looking to function. I think I've talked about a number of these things. The one thing I'd like to bring out is obviously the coordination and trying to provide a single window for a lot of the solutions and expertise that exists, but also becoming a vehicle perhaps for the implementation of some of the regional policies in Europe, so the EU Green Deal, for example, and others. Can this be a medium, a channel through which some of the EU's efforts can also be encouraged to have an impact? With this approach and mindset, the next few years will hopefully see a common journey, one that's focused around Africa continuing to transform its economies, but focused very much on sustainable, circular, innovative and inclusive principles, an improvement in the power systems, a scaling up of renewables, much more finance flowing into Africa, and perhaps that finance paying less of a price from a risk premium than before, and of course a lot of new partnerships and projects being delivered on the ground. A quick note just in terms of COVID and the situation that we all face. Certainly for me and hopefully for others as well, the pandemic has highlighted the need to think of ourselves much more as a single community, a single global community, and our interdependency with each other. I think the RES4Africa initiative comes at an excellent point at this point to begin to build more concretely a partnership and a way of working that highlights that interdependency and also enables both sides to benefit from it. Both sides have a lot to bring. Hopefully with a transparent and supportive platform, much progress can be made in the next few months. To close, just to highlight a few points about the activities in the next few months. Antonio referred to a few of these already, but just to show that we're not stopping work and there's still a lot of progress being planned to advance this and to then launch the initiative formally and to begin to make it happen on the ground. Between June, July, August, September, October, November, and December this year, there's already a series of meetings and discussions to get final sign-off. And then, of course, also engagement building on the workshops and the meetings that have happened already with African governments and African players, so that by the end of the year, the program is up and running at speed for 2021. That's the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you all for your time. I would encourage you highly to look through the report. It contains a lot of useful and interesting information, both for yourselves and also to support discussions that you have. I think we have everything. The time is now to act. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Gath Shilliking. He's the Independent Senior Sustainability Advisor, RES4Africa Foundation. And you can get a copy of this publication. All you have to do is log on to the RES4Africa website, which is res4africa.org or .org, and you'll be able to get the full publication. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are running behind time, unfortunately, and sorry about that. But I would like to invite the Honorable Minister, Matthew Nkua, who is the Minister of Energy in Zambia, to give his remarks, and he's going to be talking to us about the strategies that Zambia has put in place to accelerate renewable energy expansion in the country, and maybe hint also on how other African countries can do it. But I would like for us to please be mindful of the time, because we've got quite a number of speakers who are yet to make their presentations. Honorable Minister, a very warm welcome. Thank you, and welcome to the webinar. I think you need to unmute your microphone, Honorable Minister. We still can't hear you. I think you can tap the green microphone or the red microphone button so it can turn green.
Now he can speak.
Okay. All right, maybe somebody can can assist you. If you have an assistant in the office, they can come and help out. And for those of you who are attending and participating, would like to remind you that if you have questions, you can take advantage of the chat box that's just on the right side. All you have to do is enter your question in there, and the speaker to whom the question is directed, and at the tail end of the webinar, we will pick out some of the questions and have them responded to by some of the presenters or speakers and panelists. So just in case, you should know that you have an opportunity to ask questions. Is it working now, Honorable? Can you say something? Let's see if we can fix it. All right. So I don't know if we can have the video prepared as we wait for the minister's microphone to be fixed. We can have a video played on about the tale of Africa's energy sector.
This is the Africa imagined in 2040. I remember 20 years ago in a fishing village in Homa Bay County, seeing a middle-aged woman being dropped by a boda boda, this is a motorcycle taxi, every morning to buy fish for her fish restaurant. So with her, she carried cooking pots, utensils, and other kitchen tools that she uses for her restaurant. So such clients were faced with large amounts of spoilage, high cost of transport, and fatigue. Now, as we speak, there are new structures that have been built. There are solar-powered electric vehicles that offer cheaper transport and refrigeration. And there's an adoption of solar photovoltaic systems in the entire country as a result of this. Who knew that the power from the sun could be a solution to some of the problems faced in Kenya?
All right, and that is Ignatius Maranga, who is also a 26-year-old. Honorable Minister, can you say something now? Okay, we still can't hear him. So in the meantime, as we try to fix his technical problem, I would like to invite Anne-Charlotte Bonneville, who is the head of unit for international relations and enlargement at the EUDG, that is for ENER, and she's going to be talking to us also about some of the strategies to accelerate renewable energy expansion in Africa. Anshal, if you can hear me.
Yes, Joy, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
And can you see me? My video camera is on.
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Joy, and good afternoon, dear panelists and participants. I'm very pleased to attend this webinar today and to speak about de-risking renewable energy investments in Africa. This is, by the way, a topic that we have been extensively discussing in our EU-Africa high-level platform on sustainable energy investments, in which RES4Africa has been a very active member. And this is a topic that is even more relevant in the context of the green recovery that will help us to build back better. So the COVID crisis has put our energy systems under stress. The impact has been very strong in Africa. We see the devastating losses for African companies and the drop of oil and gas revenues. And the social and economic ramifications of the pandemic are still unfolding, both in the EU and in Africa. But in the European Commission, we also see this crisis as an opportunity to build back better and to pursue a green recovery. And a green economic recovery is not something that is driven by ideology. It is driven by scientific evidence and economic logic. So, of course, recovery will require unprecedented investment, and it will likely result in increased levels of national debt. But in return, investment will also bring job creation and sustainable growth. And as you have seen, the EU has adopted its recovery instrument, the Next Generation EU, which is worth 750 billion euros, 500 billion in grants and 250 billion euros in loans to member states. And this recovery aims at strengthening our economy by focusing on the Green Deal and digitalization. This is what we call the twin transition. So in our EU long-term decarbonization strategy, we have assessed that in order to reach the EU's 2030 climate and energy targets, about 379 billion investments are needed annually over the 2020-2030 period, mostly in energy efficiency, renewable energy sources, and infrastructure. And we have heard also the figures at the global scale, which were highlighted by Francesco La Camera. It's 4.5 trillion to finance, that we need to finance the clean energy transition. So the bulk of this investment has to come from the private sector, and EU companies should be at the forefront of these investments, and they are well placed for this. Successful renewable integration will also require robust transmission and distribution infrastructures and a well-interconnected European network. Europe has the most secure electricity grid in the world, but significant additional investments will be needed until 2030, also to cope with the increased ambition of the Green Deal. As you know, in the context of the Green Deal, we will increase our CO2 emissions reduction targets by 2030 from 40% to 50%, even up to 55%. And we will announce our climate target plan in September. So setting clear targets and designing a path to achieve those targets is a must, because investors need policy predictability. And this is why we gave in the EU a clear direction of green transformation, and we have proposed to enshrine into law the climate neutrality objective for 2050. So European businesses can use these opportunities to strengthen their competitiveness and offer their excellence by exporting and investing in energy efficiency and renewable energy globally, and particularly in Africa, which is a huge market at our doorsteps. So while key challenges in most Sub-Saharan Africa remain access to electricity, energy for productive uses, and clean cooking solutions, the clean energy transition can and should also be an opportunity for Africa in terms of investment, growth, and jobs, as well as decoupling growth and greenhouse gas emissions. So more than an agenda for climate, this is an agenda for growth. And this growth narrative is fundamental to ensure buy-in by African countries, as it fits well with the ambition to industrialize the continent. And of course, this requires a long-term view, a vision, and a plan. And against this background, we in DG Energy have identified 3 key work streams where our experience can be useful to African countries, and which I would like to share with you. The first work stream, and we've been discussing extensively already this morning, is developing the right regulatory framework, putting in place independent regulators and setting up a level playing field in procurement processes, creating open energy markets to allow for private investments into utility scale renewable energy. The second work stream is that we want to, in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we want to support African Union's ambition to develop a continental electricity market, both in terms of interconnections, infrastructure, and in terms of cross-border trade rules that would foster regional integration. And then the third work stream that is key in our view is developing new technology markets for EU companies in Africa, which would both include research and development support and establishing value chains with all related benefits in terms of employment and economic growth. And here I'm thinking, for example, of hydrogen technologies, but also technologies to reduce fugitive methane emissions when it comes to gas and decarbonizing the gas sector. So according to the last World Energy Investment Report of the IEA, energy investment is set to fall by 1/5 in 2020 due to the pandemic, and Sub-Saharan Africa will be particularly hit. So this means that countries will have to compete even more to secure much needed investments. And in this context, issues such as performance market design and business environment will be crucial elements to succeed in attracting private investment. So supporting private sector investment in Africa, in particular from European companies, is precisely at the core of the new economic partnership that the EU wants to establish with Africa. And you've seen the recent communication that we adopted in March towards a comprehensive strategy with Africa. So it sets clearly that energy will remain a priority in our EU cooperation. And we are currently working with African Union to develop a green energy initiative with the objective of presenting it at the EU African Union Summit in October this year. So from our point of view, this green energy initiative will reduce the fragmentation of EU instruments, and it will also address gaps, as well as it will be an opportunity to share knowledge on technological issues and business models. But my colleague Stefano from DG DevCo will elaborate further on this green energy initiative. So just to finish, I'd like to stress again that RES4Africa has been a valued member of the high-level platform for sustainable energy investments. The next phase of the platform is starting now, and we really hope that RES4Africa will remain an active member. So I'll stop here because I know my colleague in DevCo will elaborate further on this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. I'd now like to invite Stefano to talk to us about the theme. He is the head of the Unit for Sustainable Energy and Climate Change at DevCo. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Please,
thank you to all.
Please be mindful of the time too. We're running out of time.
Yes, of course, I will be short. So first of all, to thank RenewAfrica and congratulate for this work and the flagship publication to which we have contributed. And to say that the implementation of the external dimension of the Green Deal will be a key priority for the Commission. This is an opportunity to scale up engagement with partner countries on a positive agenda based on mutual interest. Sustainable energy and climate change will be more systematically integrated across all sectors of cooperation, from agriculture, trade, value chains, but also linked, as said by a lot. Hello? Yes?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, okay. To growth and jobs, gender and health. While the Green Deal remains a top priority for us, with the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is clear that in the short term, the stimulus and the recovery agenda will dominate the European and also the global discourse. In this context, one of our priorities will be to ensure that the recovery efforts are consistent with the protection of the environment and the climate, and that investment choices made in the immediate future will not compromise our long-term objectives. We need, therefore, to communicate on the socio-economic benefits of the green transition so as to avoid the perception of having to choose between climate action on the one side and growth on the other side. We want to support better health, affordable energy prices, food security, clean water and sanitation, and creation of sustainable jobs. RenewAfrica is therefore a strategic partner in this endeavor. We want to translate the ambitions of the Green Deal together with the COVID-19 response to support partner countries in their effort toward more resilient and sustainable energy systems. We need to align our priorities in terms of industrial policy, trade, finance, and research. And we need the industry to support this transformation in Africa. The communication of the global EU response to COVID-19 presents the Team Europe approach and goes exactly in this direction. The European industry must be part of the team approach to accelerate the global green transition. Team Europe packages on the ground will require stronger coordination. We will stress the need for ad hoc responses depending on country framework, together with tailor-made approaches for the most vulnerable. As we know, our funding alone will not be sufficient. That is why we will promote public and private investment to accelerate the transition. This will require even more coordination amongst donors and obviously with the private sectors. The external investment plan is inspired by the principle of the investment plan for Europe and builds on the experience that Europe has gained in this area and the leadership in the climate action and in sustainable energy. With the European Fund for Sustainable Development, we are rolling out a new generation of financial instruments based on risk-sharing guarantees in 5 key areas, amongst which we have sustainable energy. One example is the European Guarantee for Renewable Energy, EGRE, that we are developing with EIB, AFD, Cassa Depositi, and KfW. We are advancing our cooperation in the technical assistance support, in particular with EIB and CDP, to develop tendering schemes and pilot the RenewAfrica approach in at least 2 Sub-Saharan African countries. We have issued in March the communication towards a comprehensive strategy with Africa, proposing the launch of a green energy initiative. As Charlotte was saying, this will build on the work already done under the high-level platform for sustainable energy investment. And let me thank again RenewAfrica for the active engagement and the support that has been provided to this very good work that we did last year. We count on RenewAfrica for the follow-up of this work, now reinforced with Friend of Europe, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and IPMED. We are currently developing the UE Africa Green Energy Initiative, which will build on 3 key overarching priorities: contribute to a higher share of renewables in the energy mix, increase African people getting access to affordable, reliable and sustainable energy, and increase energy efficiency. We intend to translate all these ambitions in the context of the future programming for the next 7 years through tailor-made geographical approaches. There will be a significant increase in funds earmarked for the investment facilities, blending and guarantees to support climate action. The EU expertise will be fundamental in the partnership with Africa. It is the right time to create a more efficient and coherent EU approach. We aim at a reinforced European response with opportunities for the EU industry and initiative in direct dialogue with us. We look forward therefore to work more closely with RenewAfrica in bridging the energy gap and accelerating the green energy transition in Africa. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Stefano. We do appreciate. Honorable Minister, let me come back to you just one more time. Let's try see if it's working.
Okay.
Say something.
Okay, can you hear me, Doreen?
I can hear you.
Roberto, Mr. Vigotti, you're right. Good, thank you.
I thought right. The energy in Zambia was having an issue, but please go ahead.
Yeah, we've got enough energy, I'm sure, to get onto the platform. Yeah, it is a pleasure to be here, to participate in this webinar, scaling up renewable energy investment. More so, it zeroes in on the de-risking of investments, a factor that has a significant potential to unlock the much-needed private power investment electricity in our country. Zambia has a great potential of renewable energy. We probably have sun for about 8 to 10 hours a day. And government acknowledges that renewable can play a pivotal role towards the realization of our agenda for promoting access to affordable and sustainable energy, and also to drive economic recovery of the post-COVID phase. Thanks to the adaptability to different industrial and agriculture activities, which are the backbone of the Zambian economy. The current power deficit that we are facing in Zambia has had adverse effects, on the business, and the power deficit is due to the climate change that we are facing. We may wish to know that 80% of our power is from hydro, and therefore, when there's the climate change playing havoc on us, we have the challenges of not producing enough power. Although we have a capacity of about 2,976 megawatts, and at our peak most, we only require 2,400 megawatts, we still have a challenge. We are not able to produce the 2,400 megawatts. So renewable energy will come in and will play a major role. And part of the role that the renewable energy is going to play is by during the day, we use a lot of solar or wind so that we can save the water in the reservoirs. And then at night, then we can move and start using the water in our reservoirs. That way, with the mix, then I think our country will be sustainable. Therefore, we believe in transformative effort to private sector solution to address development challenges in the electricity sector. We recognize that public funds alone cannot solve major development challenges. Private sector partnership that use market-driven sustainable solutions are key to the economic prosperity of our country. However, to attract the financial resource needed to spur this investment and sustain economic recovery, appropriate financial and instruments and liquidity risk mechanisms are key to support Zambia socio-economic development by facilitating and speeding up private sector investment in the electricity sector. I'm confident that the work of RES4Africa and its flagship publication 2020 will contribute to sending this message and facilitating creation of such enabling environment. This will complement and scale up strides that are making towards supporting the development of renewable energy and crowding in private investors to harness the country's vast renewable energy resource. I want to commend RES4Africa for its commitment towards creating an enabling environment for renewable energy investment in Africa, and look forward to our continued collaboration as we push the target of increased access to clean, affordable, and sustainable energy and private sector partnership that will work for Zambia. So RES4Africa, you're on course, and I think that you are doing a commendable job. Please carry on with what you are doing. You've got the support of the Zambian government, and we'll work together to make sure that we have sustainable electricity in our country. Thank you. If there's one or two questions, maybe I can take them, because I'm rushing to Parliament. I should be in Parliament in a few minutes' time.
All right. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. You did mention that you have 2,976 megawatts capacity. How much more, or in terms of priority besides hydro energy, energy?
It's gone mute.
Honorable Minister, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, and in terms of priority, in addition to hydropower, what other sources of energy is Zambia prioritizing?
We have solar, wind energy, and geothermal. So these are the other energies. And also we are doing small hydro stations. We've got a lot of water on the northern side of Zambia. So we are doing small hydro power stations on the northern part of Zambia. But we want to prioritize on solar and wind mainly.
Solar and wind. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. We do appreciate your remarks and also the time taken to join this webinar today. We do appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
All right. You too, Honorable. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to speak about the role of a comprehensive de-risking approach, look into the policy dialogue, technical assistance, financial instruments, and capacity building.
Sure.
And to kick off this conversation, I would like to welcome John Lezames, who is the Global Head of Public Affairs at Siemens Gamesa. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Joy. Please, Fabio, if you can put my slides, that could be appreciated from my side. So thank you very much, dear all. Let me first thank to RES4Africa Foundation for the opportunity granted to Siemens Gamesa to take an active role on today's very high level webinar. I would also like to thank Roberto Figotti and the whole Secretariat for the magnificent work having conducted up until now. to reach the status where we currently are, both Roberto in RES4Africa as well as RenewAfrica initiative. We at Siemens Gamesa feel extremely proud of being partners, active partners to RES4Africa Foundation and the RenewAfrica initiative. I don't know if you can see the presentation already.
Not yet. You should be coming up shortly. You could go ahead as
okay, I will go ahead. Yes, that is fine. First of all, I would like to give you a light flavor about our more than 40 years old company, integrated by more than 24,000 passionate employees. We have been pioneers in the wind sector, having installed more than 100 gigas of wind in more than 90 countries. That is a brief for the introduction of our global company, but what is our presence in Africa and our commitment to the African continent? Since we built our first project in Tunisia back in 1999, we have become the leaders in the continent in the wind sector with a 57 market share, having installed above 3.6 gigas in 8 countries and growing. We are currently having starting a project in Djibouti, 60 megawatt project in Djibouti, while we will be doing so hopefully for a 100 megawatt project in Ethiopia. Our endeavor for the continent is also shown, and I think some of the speakers also mentioned as one of the key levels, the socio-economic impact of renewables and the opportunities it brings on both the sector to the African continent. It is also shown in the fact that we have more than 850 employees in the continent, and that in 2017, we inaugurated a blade manufacturing facility in Tangier in Morocco, the first wind turbine component manufacturing facility ever in the Middle East and Africa, region. Having explained that could be in a slide 3, and I guess that it could be available afterwards to you, but having explained where we at Siemens Gamesa are coming from and the experience we bring to RES4Africa and to the RenewAfrica initiative, now I would like to focus in underlining briefly which we consider that are the 6 key levers to unlock the full potential of renewables in the continent. And I think most of them have already been brought on board by the high-level speakers having been taking part before my introduction. First, the consolidation of the sector as well as opening new opportunities requires an early engagement with key decision makers. Energy is about medium and long-term planning. So the earlier the engagement, the higher the success ratio. Our experience in Africa shows that project development lasts on average more than 10 years. And it has been mainly driven by the public sector or pioneering entrepreneur initiatives. Considering competitiveness of renewables, it is our duty, also an opportunity, to engage those relevant stakeholders to create the appropriate long-term frameworks. Yeah, if you can go to the last slide, that would be appreciated. Next one, please. Perfect. Yeah, perfect. I'm in point number 1. In point number 2, and in order to go on speed, there has been and still are many fragmented initiatives regarding Africa, led by stronger stakeholders. We at Siemens Gamesa consider that building fewer but stronger and more focused initiatives composed by global leaders will lead us to our goals. Third, there is a need to share with key stakeholders experience gained by sector leaders globally to Africa regarding positive socio-economic impact of renewables. And that becomes even more relevant currently with the economic slowdown arising from COVID-19 that has been mentioned previously. Our blade manufacturing facility in Tangier, as well as high local content values that we at Siemens Gamesa use in building our projects and conducting operation and maintenance, are a very good example of that. As fourth element, once all the elements for the appropriate frameworks have been established, investors need tailor-made financing capabilities being built. And I think that both Mr. Starace as well as Gus, they were mentioning that we need to lower the risk perception of investors, because sometimes it is just between brackets, we make also a perception rather than a reality. As a fifth element, a clear and sound voice about the benefits of renewables in Africa has to be raised. We have to reinforce the momentum despite COVID-19 for the bet to renewables to be reinforced. And last but not least, it was mentioned also by Vera Songwe, involving Africa in the plan and boosting and leveraging on the regional integration and huge opportunities arising from a 1.2 billion continent to be doubled by 2050 is crucial. Thinking big, maximizing the competitiveness of renewables for the needs of the continent is the backbone of our strategy. Vera Songwe was mentioning the role of the power pools, the African Free Trade Continental Agreement. Those are crucial. And RES4Africa, we consider RES4Africa and RenewAfrica initiative are precisely tackling the 6 elements mentioned, and we are convinced that we will deliver. We would be more than happy also to accelerate the drumbeat being played by Roberto Bigotti and the Secretariat for doing so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. We appreciate that. And you talked about reinforcing regional integration. And now that we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, I guess that would be a good way as well to inject the power pools as well. Next speaker is Carola Pustelli, who is the Power Generation Segment Vice President at Schneider Electric. A warm welcome, and the floor is yours now.
Do you hear me well?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, excellent. And I will see if I can change my slide myself as well, if possible. So, great pleasure to be with you today. As a sustainability fanatic, being part of the RenewAfrica Foundation is very motivating for me as a person. Before starting, I'd like to share a couple of facts about Schneider on this slide. So we focus on the digital transformation of energy management and automation for our customers. And we believe that access to energy and digital is a basic human right. What is important to notice is our commitment to Africa, where we are present since the last 60 years. We have almost 3,000 employees in Africa that is active everywhere with manufacturing sites, with training facilities and huge network of partners. And it seems like I cannot change the slide myself. That's a pity. No, I cannot. So maybe someone can change the slide for me. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. To electrify and decarbonize Africa, we need to make sure that the renewable investments are sustainable over time and creates job and business locally. So today I would like to share my view on the importance of having a safe, efficient electrical network to integrate the renewable assets and to build the local knowledge to design, construct, and operate and maintain these assets. So if the local grid cannot manage utility scale renewables, then the objective that we have talked about during this conference of affordable, green, and reliable energy for all is impossible. I think we cannot let Africa repeat the Kodak digitalization disaster and miss the opportunity to step up technology-wise. So we must focus on supporting the countries on digitizing the energy network step by step. So first, fixing the basic, making sure that the electrical equipment are safe and smart, and then invest in in-field digital technologies to decrease the maintenance cost and to reduce the SAIDI and the SAIFI in the country. And then, most important, make sure that the electrical grid gets smart. We talked about it earlier. Make sure that to implement a distribution management system to better integrate the renewables and to reduce the losses, both the technical losses and the non-technical losses. And of course, all this needs to be done in a cybersecure way. So the second challenge that we see is that we have a lack of T&D lines between countries. We heard that during this conference, that hinders the access to power integration. It needs to extend we need to extend the existing grid and add interconnections between countries. Today, when we have transmission interconnections, they are sometimes congested, and some countries remain then isolated from the regional grids. to facilitate trading, interconnection need to be upgraded and need to be digitized. The transmission cost allocation is also an issue. Fully integrated regional power market have the potential to reduce the cost of electricity and services in many countries. So next slide, please. So let's talk about my favorite subject, if you can change the slide, which is about people. For me, it's fundamental to make sure that when we supply digital solution, there's a real transfer of knowledge to the operators and maintenance team, of course, but when possible also to establish local manufacturing sites. And if it's not possible, to make sure that we create a network of local partners that can continue to work not only with utilities, but also to increase private sector consumption. And when it comes to training and upskilling of local resources in general, we need to encourage and support local training programs with the governments, like we have done, for example, in Algeria. This will enhance the technology transfer and mitigate the risk of not finding the right suitable labor in some countries. And for the IPPs that are attending this call, I know that to find skilled workers is a big challenge for you. It's a major roadblock for investment and competitivity. Next slide, please. And I'm coming to the conclusions. I'm trying to catch up some time here. What we believe is that renewal can be a key contributor for Africa's post-COVID recovery, improving the quality of life of millions of people. It's now the cheapest resource. It's now the cheapest source of energy that we have. But what is more important is it's the most suitable and effective solution to achieve Africa's security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability all at once. But unlocking Africa's renewable energy potential requires to bridge the missing link between the renewable generation and the existing aging grid. And to make the energy transition possible, there is an urgent need for a clear decarbonization strategy and policy from the governments, the grid interconnectivity, and to modernize and digitize the existing electrical assets. And finally, and you understand that this is one of my passions, the key success factors is around people. We need trained local resources, both from the renewable investment, but also to create sustainable local wealth. So in a nutshell, I believe, and we at Schneider believe, that green and digital transformation must go hand in hand, and the upskilling is fundamental for the success. And that's all I had to say today. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope there are some questions. Otherwise, I'll leave the floor to the next speakers.
All right, thank you so much, Carola. Much appreciated. There's a need for trained local resources for renewable energy and also to create sustainable local wealth. Our next speaker is Luca Matron, who is the global head of
Excuse me, Joy. We have first Ernesto Chorra and then Luca Matrone, please.
Okay, all right. Just before Luca comes on, apologies for that. We'd like to bring on Ernesto Fiora, who is the general manager, NL Foundation, and then we will have Luca Matron right after that. Apologies for that. Please go ahead, Ernesto.
Thanks, everybody. I just a picture to share with you. I hope that, okay, this is the picture. It describes that an NL Foundation alumnus with his university team, he designed the first worldwide open source ventilator. Was he from the MIT? The MIT team was working on this. Was he from United States? From Europe? From Australia? No, he's from Africa. He was an alumnus of us during the Open Africa Power Education activity that we have implemented in Africa with many African leaders. And we are very proud of celebrate his success, because this African team combined with different people from the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, they beated also the MIT team and many other teams all around the world working on the first open source ventilator to provide ventilators with a low cost to the world. During this pandemic time, it's very important because, as you know, without ventilators, people can die. And we need many thousands of them, unfortunately, due to the tremendous health emergency that we are facing. So I started from this example to underline that, okay, we know that there is a lack of electricity access in Africa. That is an enormous barrier to Africa's progress. But we need to consider and underline that education and capacity building represent two fundamental enabling factors also for the energy industry. Regulatory framework and good governance and access to capitals, okay, they are important, but without the right education and the right skills, unfortunately, Africa, as Europe, as United States, can't win their challenges. And if we look at our challenge, our common challenge, to promote the transformations needed to establish a decarbonized, resilient, and affordable electricity sector across the African continent, education is mandatory. Because if you look at a recent study run by Enel Foundation and Bocconi, this study demonstrates that there is a huge education gap. Enrollment rates in the continent reach just over 20%, while global average is 38%. So we are fully committed to fill this gap. We are fully committed to help African leaders to get the right knowledge, the right education with the right training. And we are working as Enel Foundation to fill this gap with hundreds of African leaders. That's why I started with just a story of one of them who was an alumnus of our African Open Power course. And we are very happy to share this information and this point of view here with RES4Africa Foundation, because we are working with RES4Africa Foundation on different courses, Microgrid Academy, advanced training course that we organize with RES4Africa Foundation. And we are very proud of those courses because they are aimed at filling this gap. We think that as Pasolini, he was a very famous artist, poet, screen player, and director. He was very famous in Italy. Pierpaolo Pasolini distinguished the sustainable progress and the development. The development relates just to economic indexes, but the sustainable progress refers to economic, social, cultural, and environmental real progress. And we are fully committed for a sustainable progress. That's why we think that these education courses, these courses are aimed to create a better society, and they are aimed at creating a brighter future with more electricity, a brighter future for Africa, and a brighter future for our ecosystem, because we are African too. We are working in Zambia, we are working in Ethiopia, we are working in South Africa, and I could continue. Enel is African too, and we are very proud of being African. We are very proud of creating a brighter future, providing access to electricity, and working with as a group to create a better society in Africa. And we are getting a lot from African activities, not only in terms of money, not only in terms of cultural contamination that is very important, but in terms of humanity, in terms of education that we are getting from a lot of startups. We are collaborating in the African continent, and a lot of social organizations that are helping us to create better social conditions in areas where we work. I just give you the two aims that we are pursuing with the Open Africa Power. First of all, retain talent to the benefit of African society at large. We want to create skilled and committed leaders and promote the culture of give back at the local level, pushing people to stay in Africa and to create a better Africa, not to live from it. And secondly, we want to encourage personal and professional empowerment of women as leading actors in the transformation of local, national, and continental energy sector. And 2 and 5 participants to our course were women, and we are very happy for that contribution that we have got from those women. Thanks a lot, and let's continue working together with RES4Africa, that is fundamental partner for us.
All right. Thank you so much, Ernesto Ciora, the General Manager, NL Foundation. And I'd now like to invite Luca Matron, the Global Head of Energy at Intensa Sao Paulo. Welcome, Luca.
Thank you very much, Joy, and thank you to everyone joining this webinar. We are very proud to be part of RES4Africa Foundation and of having worked on RenewAfrica. So, Fabio, if you can get on the first slide, please. Just a quick snapshot. Intesa Sanpaolo is the largest Italian bank and is the third largest bank in Europe by market cap. We are present in Africa through WIMI Corporate Investment Banking Division, and we finance deals in Kenya, Cameroon, Angola, Egypt, Ethiopia, Zambia, Ghana, and a few other countries. And we are also present through Alex Bank, that is basically one of the largest Egyptian bank. We have in total 8 billion of assets that are deployed in Africa. Next slide, please. The largest financing of renewable projects that we participated in was the Koisha project in Ethiopia in 2017, and this was a financing done to basically an export credit facility. So it was backed by SACE, an Italian credit export agency, with the two Ethiopian electric power. Next slide, please. So if we look at a renewable project, and we are not in the let's say scenario of a project financed through the recourse on the sponsor. So if you are in a context of asset-based financing, basically you have many parties that are involved, and so you have the sponsors, you have obviously the lenders, you have the project company, you have the off-takers, you have the EPC contractor, the O&M contractor, and you have many contracts that regulate the relationship among those parties. And the most important thing is how to balance those contracts, how you transfer the risk to the party that is more let's say has a more experience and is more linked to that risk. So if you go on the next page, Fabio, basically the mitigation of those risks is the most important thing in order to scale up renewables. In the report that has been released today, basically in the second chapter, basically we highlighted the two type of risks: the country-related risks that are general risks. So, for example, when you have an effective regulatory bodies, when you have administrative or bureaucratic redundancies, or some specific country situations, no? So with asset expropriation risks, foreign exchange risk, when you have a permitting or licensing risk, dispute resolution risk. So all those risks relate to a country and needs to be addressed. Then you have a project-related risks that are more common in project financing or asset-based financing globally. So it's not an African-specific point. And this is those are the pre-completion risks. So typically cost overruns, delays, shortfalls in performance, or post-completion risk. So the risks that you have with the off-taker or curtailment risk, so that you are curtailed and you cannot sell all the capacity of the power after you get connected. So all those risks need to be properly managed, and it's important that a sustainable renewable sustainable program try to address those risks, and this is why basically we believe it is very important, the Renew Africa initiative. This is because if you go on the next page, what we assessed is that, as Gas was explaining at the beginning, most of those programs, of the existing programs, are very, very good for the first phase, and also for the preparation phase. So they are very good in capacity building, they are very good in policy dialogue, they are very good in technical assistance. They have some, let's say, gaps in the construction phase and in the operating phase. According to a research of RES4Africa and PwC of 2019, we have seen that 41%, only 41% of the existing instruments basically cover all the financing schemes, so equity, debt, or grants, cover all the instruments available, so equity, debt, and grants. We have seen that only the 29% of the programs cover all the technology, so are technological neutral, and only 41% basically cover both guarantees and insurance, or at least provide guarantees. So this is why, you know, it is very important, Renew Africa, because we need a program that go over the current fragmentation and try to fulfill the gaps that exist in the current programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luca Matron. And now I would like to invite Amit Singh, who is the head energy finance at Nedbank, which is a South African bank and member of RES4Africa as well, to share some insights on South Africa's story and also how best we can scale up renewable energy investments around South Africa and beyond. Welcome, Amit.
Yeah, good day. Yeah, good day, everybody, from a very cold Johannesburg. Although the sun is out, we are in the midst of our winter, and also the COVID crisis is really becoming a big problem now. So we all pray for some relief soon. Just to thank the organizers and RES4Africa for the opportunity today. Thank you. You know, when the foundation recently spoke, now NL Foundation spoke about South African engineers being part of the open source ventilators, it's really heartwarming and exciting for us to see that even in this small part of the world that we can contribute as South Africans. So that is great news. Yeah, so I'll just go across a few points and thoughts in my mind and how really to upscale this the renewable energy initiatives, and generally the banking and the bankability of projects is last litmus test if to attract capital and for projects to be successful. And I think banks play a good role, as my colleague from Intesa spoke about now, the different principles for bankability. But on the macro side of it, you know, in terms of policy, if we really want to see Africa to make leaps and bounds in the renewable space, we need to see big programs being launched, like the South African program, the REAP program, which we had, and it attracted significant amount of projects, investors. But to get the scale where bidding rules are clear, consistent, the framework is well structured, that will attract IPPs, it'll attract capital, it'll attract people to take the sector seriously. Few small projects, 10 megawatts, 20 megawatts, is not going to make a big initiative. We need programs of hundreds of megawatts, even thousands of megawatts. It can be phased off over the different periods, but the programs are critical for these things to work. Last week we spoke about auction programs and that type of ones we mentioned. But I think the programs should not only stop at generation, there should also be programs for transmission distribution infrastructure to privatize that, and also for smart grids. In rural Africa, smart grids will have to be the key element where, you know, there's no huge transmission lines from distribution to the end user. So smart grids it will really play a big role in that. But we see that in most African countries, the policy framework is still being developed, and even the introduction of private sector through IPPs is not really established, where the culture of allowing private sector into your grids and making a big difference in contributing to your electrifying your country. So there has to be a world global shift, and I think the part of my EU colleagues from the EU are here, is to change this narrative for the governments in Africa to really allow private sector into the power distribution and generation and transmission framework. Then we need the power pools. You know, some countries have bigger generation capacity than others. The power pools and policies to strengthen this power pools so that we can trade it through the different countries. And I think that's quite a good diversification and risk mitigants which we need to work on. So around those policies, those are the big themes that we need to address. Then in terms of technical assistance, you know, grids, most of the power grids, distribution, transmission grids are very old in South Africa, and for them to accept power from intermittent renewable sources, it's still a challenge. It can be fixed with technology. We saw Siemens here and many other colleagues around the world has provided very clever technology, but we really need to upskill and prove to our local utilities that these things can be done. And although with the old infrastructure, with some modern technology, you can really make it work. So the technical assistance around that narrative is quite important. In terms of capacity building, you know, most countries would need proper legal frameworks to develop these big programs. And through this EU partnership, the rest of Africa, how do we support these governments through the treasuries, through the ministries, to have the capacity in terms of legal framework to develop this? You know, in some countries like Uganda, Kenya, it's very well established. South Africa, but there's many other countries lacking the legal framework. And I think if we provide some capacity building there, then the next capacity building is local manufacturing. If we do not have a holistic story for the countries in Africa in terms of the renewable story, and only stop at providing generation thing without the job creation factor, without creating local industries for the renewables. We know about the blade manufacturing in Morocco. Now we heard about Siemens Gamesa. In South Africa, we started, but it's stop and go, and it's very hard to sustain. But we need to build in the local job content and the job creation. Otherwise, we will not get significant buy-in for these programs. As much as we need the power, we also need the jobs in South Africa. So that's quite important. Then the last thing which I'll discuss now is financial assistance. You know, grant funding and subsidized programs is not really sustainable. It is good to get 1 or 2 programs going on, but in terms of large-scale deployment and rollout of programs, we need to be commercialized about this, because many DFIs or any institutions will run out of limits slowly. And if they go and set up tariffs with such low tariffs with subsidized grant funding, and which cannot be replicated for future programs, it sets a very, very bad baseline for governments to judge future programs, and therefore programs will never be replicated because the initial programs were done at such low tariffs. So it creates an artificial stimulus to the sector, which cannot really be sustained on the long run. So, you know, we have to be very commercial about this so that we have sustainable programs on the long run, rather than 1 or 2 small programs and then it stops there. Then the other important thing of financial assistance is the local currency funding. I think our colleague from the World Bank spoke recently now, and local currency, we know many African treasuries and economies just do not have depth for long-term local currency funding. The markets are just not deep enough, it's very shallow. So we don't see that problem will definitely be eliminated in the short to medium term. Maybe in the long runs, when the economies get developed and to scale, we'll find more in-depth capital markets, but we'll still see a lot of local dollar euro funding for these projects. But I think institutions like the European Union, the World Bank, the IFC, if they can play big roles in mitigating some of the foreign currency payments from the utilities. Remember, they collect the electricity revenues in local currency and they have hard currency dollar euro payments for the debt, for the sale or the purchase of the power. So how can these institutions be an enabler to mitigate the risk from this treasuries? The last 2 points I will say is that, as we also heard today, many utilities in Africa are bankrupt. Even the national credits of the national treasuries and government sovereign ratings are very low and not really be able to take long-term credit positions over 10 to 20 years over this. So we would need some form of huge utility credit support from the EU or World Bank. We've been talking about first loss positions, but something more depth, a really, really big program that will entice governments to see that how can they work and provide stimulus for the investment in electricity sector. Without that credit support from the utilities, the sector will also be left behind in the dark ages. So we really need to think how we support the national governments, the ministries, and the utilities in a proper scale program. It shouldn't be a support where utilities feel they can default and naturally the lenders and the investors will have protection from this kind of super insurance. It should be something where they also invest in and have vested interest not to default. We know MIGA has some policies, EIB has certain things, but we need this in a really big scale where it can really be a big stimulus and attraction for IPPs and banks to deploy capital in projects. And the last thing is I mentioned now is a political insurance. Due to the political instability in many countries in Africa, this is also proving to be a very, very important cost factor in terms of your tariffs, where you add up premiums for policies and makes these programs and these projects sometimes unaffordable for government. So how do we find an HS scale where we have some form of political insurance that's really affordable to help stimulate the sector and rather not hinder it? I think I've spoken a lot now. Just put in a few thoughts there. I have not gone too detailed because of the time factor, which I'm very relevant and conscious of. We look forward to future engagements with RES4Africa, and this is an important platform to share thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amit Singh, who is the head energy finance Nedbank in South Africa. Thank you for the insights. You did mention something to do with the need for huge utility credit support. What areas or what sectors exactly can be explored to have this done? Because if there's need for this huge utility credit support, how exactly do countries or governments go about this?
Yeah, so Africa and then 50 countries. So I think if there's a proposal through this engagement to the EU in the next few months to understand what form of sustainable support that they can provide to these utilities, it's something that we could think and unpack further. It's literally credit support that they would need to attract both IPPs and banks to deploy capital in there.
All right, thank you very much.
But I think EU engagement is quite important, and we should use that opportunity to unpack that. And I'm seeing Roberto smiling there, so I hope that's in the agenda, Roberto. Yeah.
All right, let me now, I don't know, Mr. Roberto Vigotti, would you like to say something before we share the video on RenewAfrica?
Very quickly, thank you so much for the quality of your intervention. You will receive minutes, proceedings, and I invite you to download the book and other things. We will see soon in the fall with the other series of webinars. I'm really delighted with the quality of this presentation. So let's finish because there are still 180 people, still never enough. Go ahead, Joy. Thank you to you, Joy, for the final 3 minutes that at least it will compensate their patience. Joy.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'd now like to request you to spare just a minute of your time to watch this video before we can come to a close. So it's a video on RenewAfrica. So let's watch it and then we can close.
What do we think of when we say Africa? Today, the most reasonable answer would be growth. Africa is growing at an unrelenting speed in terms of demographics, economics, urbanization, and digitalization. And as any growth, Africa's development is coming with a huge potential for investments and a huge need for energy. Good news. The world's fastest growing continent is also one of the richest areas in terms of renewable energy potential. Wind, sun, water, geothermal. Wild forces of nature ready to be turned into energy. Pure, powerful, renewable energy. But nature won't turn into electricity all by itself. It needs technology, workforce, infrastructure, know-how, in one word, investments. Despite Africa's huge potential, only 2% of the world's added renewable energy capacity was installed here in the last decade. Why is it so hard to invest in renewable energy in Africa? Because it's not always a fertile land for private investments, with geopolitical and financial risks, insufficient support to investors throughout the project cycle. Learning how to deal with this background will unlock renewable energy investments at scale, providing Africa with the energy it needs. There are many existing European schemes supporting investments in Africa. Their impact is still low as they are marked by a high level of fragmentation. How can we stimulate investments in Africa when public money alone is not enough? By providing a new integrated program built on best practices and combining policies, regulations, financing, and de-risking, it will reduce fragmentation and create synergies among the existing instruments. RenewAfrica, a powerful industry-backed initiative with the mission to scale up renewable energy in Africa, creating a comprehensive one-stop shop to enable and de-risk investments. The program will support investors and governments across all technologies, all sizes, including electrical grids, in most African countries, creating a pipeline of bankable projects. Unlocking renewable energy investments at scale is a unique opportunity for Africa to forward its green transition, leapfrogging polluting technologies. This is the challenge of the 21st century as a guarantee of energy security and geopolitical stability. With its European Green Deal and its strategy with Africa, Europe is ready to lead global climate action. Let's join our forces. This is the decade of action. The time to act is now.
No sento.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that great production as well, giving us a perspective into the potential of Africa's renewable energy. And the time to act is now. If you haven't downloaded the publication, the 2020 publication on Africa or scaling up Africa's renewable power, please do so. Visit the website res4africa.org or .org and download it. Please download it and go through it as well. Thank you all so much for participating. Yes, Mr. Roberto?
Joy, also the video can be downloaded from the RenewAfrica website. If people are interested, you can download and use it, okay? Good.
Okay, great. Now you heard it. You can download the video as well. So thank you all so much for taking the time to the over 330 of you who participated today, and to the over 160 who stayed on up until the end. Much, much appreciated. Thank you all so much and wish you the very best. Thank you to all the panelists and speakers. Thank you. And the organizers as well. Thank you so much in the background who are doing a lot of the work. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.